The Pacific sun rises over an island of rust. Beneath layers of coral and salt, a ghost of steel sleeps. A Japanese Type 95 Heigo tank, once proud, now hollow. In the 1940s, this machine was a symbol of ambition, speed, and empire. But to the U.S. Marines who first faced it, it was something else entirely. A riddle of war that made them laugh. 1933. Tokyo hums with the rhythm of marching boots and clanging metal. The Imperial Japanese Army demands mobility, a tank that can sail across bridges, jungles, and rice fields. Engineers design something new, small, light, and swift. The Type 95 Heigo, 37 millimeters of armor, a crew of 3, a machine gun that rattled like wind chimes. It was never meant to fight other tanks, only to crush the unarmored. When it first rolled from Mitsubishi's doors, the generals smiled. To them, lighter meant faster, cheaper, easier to ship to far-flung islands. But the Pacific would prove a cruel teacher. The Hago's first taste of war came in the fields of Manchuria and the plains of China. Against infantry with rifles, it was invincible. Villages burned and roads trembled under its treads. The tank that could be shipped by train now raced through rivers and dust. It was light enough to cross bamboo bridges and lethal enough to make the enemy flee. The Japanese press called it the Iron Dragon. But even dragons have soft scales. The Heigo's armor could be pierced by heavy rifle fire. Its engine overheated in tropical heat. Yet Tokyo pressed on, believing speed would triumph where steel could not. 1941. The Pacific explodes in flames. Pearl Harbor burns. Manila trembles. The Hago rides again. This time across islands it was never meant to see. In Luzon, on Guam, on the sands of Saipan, the bamboo beast rolls ashore from landing barges. But the U.S. Marines waiting on those beaches are armed with something new, Browning .50 caliber machine guns. The stage is set for one of the strangest encounters in military history. As the tanks approach, the Marines hold their fire, watching the tiny machines rumble closer. The moment the Brownings open up, something unexpected happens. The bullets slice through the Hago's armor, clean, effortless, unreal. The men laugh in disbelief. The myth of Japanese armor shatters in seconds. For the Marines, it was victory and comedy rolled into one. For the Japanese, it was horror, realizing that their proud light tank was no match for modern fire. Yet the Hago would keep fighting. Its weakness became its curse, and its legend. The Pacific War had only begun. The laughter on that beach would echo through the islands, carried by waves, by memory, and by the ghosts of machines too light for the war they were built to fight. The Pacific burned like a map made of oil. Every island, a spark. Every beach, a battlefield. In 1942, Japan's empire stretched from Manchuria to the Solomons. Their Hago tanks rolled ashore at dawn, light, nimble, and fragile. But the Pacific was not China. Here, the jungle was thicker, the mud deeper, and the enemy far more prepared. To the Marines, the Hago was a curiosity. To the Japanese, it was still a symbol of reach. The empire's iron wave rolling west. The first great test came in the Philippines. Luzon's roads trembled as Hago tanks led the charge toward Manila. Against outdated American and Filipino armor, they found success, briefly. But as the campaign dragged on, the flaws began to show. Its paper-thin armor was pierced even by anti-tank rifles. Its rivets popped loose under pressure. The jungle heat turned its cramped steel hull into an oven. Yet the Japanese crews fought with honor, driving their machines through swamp and flame, refusing to yield. The Hago was not a tank of power, but of will. When Manila fell in 1942, Japan celebrated victory, but few noticed how many of their light tanks had burned out to get there. By 1943, the Pacific tide had turned. The U.S. Navy ruled the seas. The Marines came island by island, relentless. Guam, Tarawa, Saipan. Each name etched into history, each battle fiercer than the last. At Tarawa, Hago tanks waited in ambush, buried halfway in sand, camouflaged under palm leaves. The Marines came ashore. The tanks opened fire. For a moment, the battlefield shimmered like the old days of conquest. Then, the .50 cals spoke again. The armor split open like tin. Crewmen fled, brave, terrified, human. The Marines laughed again, but it was laughter born from disbelief, not cruelty. They had never seen war so uneven. It felt wrong to fight something so weak. But the Pacific gave no mercy, only heat, salt, and fire. By late 1944, the Hago should have been obsolete, yet it kept appearing. On every new island, another handful emerged from bunkers or jungles. It was as if Japan could not let go of the dream that speed could outwit strength. Some Hagos were buried up to their turrets, used as bunkers. Others became moving tombs, driven straight into Marine lines as suicidal charges. The laughter faded. The Marines stopped seeing toys. They started seeing courage, desperate, doomed, but courage nonetheless. The Pacific Islands had become graveyards of iron and men. The war was far from over. And the Hago, the bamboo beast, was still not done burning. The air was thick with humidity, and the jungle whispered like a living thing. Saipan, 1944. The 2nd Marine Division moved cautiously through green tunnels of bamboo and smoke. Every leaf could hide an ambush. Every sound could be death. They expected snipers, mines, maybe machine guns, not tanks. Not here. Then came the rumble, faint, metallic, alien, the sound of treads in the mud. Tanks, someone whispered. The word cut through the jungle like thunder. Through the trees, something moved. A shadow of steel, painted green, crawling like an insect of war. The Marines fanned out, weapons ready. It was small. Too small. "That's no Sherman," one muttered. The Hago emerged, turret glinting, gun pointing blindly into the underbrush. The tank stopped. Its engine coughed. A burst from its 37mm cannon tore through the trees, splinters flying. The Marines hit the dirt, returning fire with M1 rifles, BARs, and .50 cals. The sound cracked the air like thunderclaps. The first .50 caliber burst hit the tank's side. Sparks flew, holes punched clean through the armor. The Marines froze. They couldn't believe it. They fired again, this time laughing in disbelief. The rounds sliced through one side and out the other. "It's like shooting through a car door," someone yelled. The laughter echoed through the jungle, mixed with the metallic screams of tearing steel. For a moment, it wasn't war. It was absurdity. The Marines, hardened by death and loss, found something so fragile it was almost comical. But laughter in war never lasts. As they approached the wreck, they saw the truth through the smoke. The crew, 3 men, had fought to the last. Burned, trapped, unyielding. The laughter stopped. The jungle went quiet again. The Marines stared at the wreck, and what they saw was not weakness, but will. Word spread through the units. about the cardboard tanks the Japanese used. Stories turned to jokes. Jokes turned to myths. But among the older Marines, those who'd seen the inside of those steel coffins, there was no mockery, only understanding. They knew what it meant to face overwhelming odds. They had done it themselves, across the Pacific, and somewhere deep inside, they respected those Hago crews, men who went to war in tanks that could not save them. The Hago was no longer just a tank. It was a symbol of courage, futility, and the strange humor that keeps men sane in war. From laughter to silence, the Marines' encounter with the Hago was not just a story of war. It was a reminder, even the weakest steel can hold the strongest hearts. The battle was over, but the silence that followed was louder than gunfire. The jungle steamed with smoke and ghosts. The Hago lay torn open, a thin metal shell crumpled like paper, blackened by fire. Inside were the remains of men, not monsters, not enemies, just soldiers, whose courage had outlasted their armor. The Marines gathered quietly, eyes down. One took off his helmet. Another whispered a prayer he didn't know he remembered. The war had stripped them of many things: fear, mercy, sometimes even hope. But never humanity. The Hago was smaller than a delivery truck, but it carried 3 lives: commander, gunner, driver, cramped together in a coffin of steel. No ventilation, no escape hatch, no armor thick enough to matter. When fire came, it came fast. Yet they climbed in anyway, every time. Their courage was not in the machine. It was in themselves. They fought knowing they could not win, believing that death in service was better than life in surrender. When the tank burned, they did not run. The Marines who found them would remember that forever. Across the Pacific, the same story repeated. On Saipan, on Peleliu, on Okinawa. Men fought not just for land, but for pride, for the faces they'd never see again. Metal broke first, flesh followed, but faith, that burned the longest. On the American side, new tanks rolled ashore, Shermans, half-tracks, amphibious monsters. They were the symbols of industry and power. On the Japanese side, the Hago became a relic, still fighting, still dying, long after it should have been retired. Yet the men inside both machines were the same: flesh under armor, hearts under helmets, bound by duty, crushed by history. In Tokyo, even as the empire began to crumble, engineers still drew designs for new tanks, bigger, stronger, as if faith could replace steel. But by 1945, no design could stop the tide. The war had become a battle of beliefs. For Japan, honor and endurance. For America, progress and production. And between them, men of metal and flesh, burning in the same inferno. The Marines called it victory. The Japanese called it sacrifice. History would call it inevitable. But no matter what name it carried, every flame, every wreck, every tank that melted into the soil whispered the same truth. Metal can be rebuilt. Flesh cannot. The Pacific War was no longer about who would win, but about who would still be human when it ended. The Pacific is calm now. The waves wash over the same shores that once burned red. Beneath the water, coral grows around twisted steel. The Hago, the Sherman, the ghosts of machines that once screamed through flame. Time has buried them gently, as if the ocean itself wanted to forget. But the ocean does not forget. It only whispers, carrying echoes of voices that once shouted across the waves. After the war, some Marines returned to those islands, gray-haired now, slower, quieter. They stood where their younger selves had once fought and laughed. The jungle had reclaimed everything. Only the rusted skeletons of Hago tanks remained, half swallowed by vines and time. One Marine touched the cold metal and said softly, "They were kids, just like us." That sentence lingered in the air, more powerful than any victory speech, because in the end, it wasn't about tanks or tactics. It was about people, flesh, fear, laughter, and loss, all carried away by the same endless sea. History remembers victories. The ocean remembers everything. It keeps no sides, only silence. The Hago was never the strongest tank, but its story endures because it speaks to the heart of war itself. That courage does not require power, only conviction. For every tank that burned, a lesson was written in fire. Progress can build machines, but only compassion can rebuild humanity. The Pacific sleeps tonight, dreaming of ships, of tanks, of men who once believed they could master it. But the ocean is patient. It outlasts empires. And if you listen closely, beneath the sound of the surf, you might still hear the echo of laughter, of fear, of the thin metal beast that met the fire and became a legend. The Pacific. It was supposed to be over. After Saipan fell in 1944, the Marines believed Japan's strength had broken. The rusted Hago tanks they'd laughed at seemed like relics of a dead empire. But in the islands ahead, new shadows moved. Quiet, patient, forged in desperation. The war was not finished. It was transforming. In the wreckage of Saipan, the U.S. Marines began to understand what total war meant. Thousands of civilians leapt from cliffs. Japanese soldiers fought to the last man. And yet, Japan still refused to surrender. Behind the emperor's silence, the factories of Manchuria and Honshu still hammered on. In Tokyo, the Imperial Army's engineers studied the shattered Hagos, returned from the front. The reports were humiliating. Bullets tore through the armor, the engines overheated, and the steel was too thin to save a crew. But humiliation is fuel. And from that humiliation, they began to forge something new. The Americans, meanwhile, were preparing for their next leap. The invasion of the Marianas, the Philippines, and beyond. The laughter of Saipan had faded. Now, the Marines carried a new respect and a new fear. Because the enemy who refuses to die learns how to evolve. By late 1944, whispers reached the fleet. Japan had begun building new tanks, heavier, thicker, and deadlier than the Hago. The Marines who'd once laughed at the tin can now cleaned their rifles in silence. In the Pacific, fire breeds fire. The laughter had turned to resolve. The next invasion would not be a joke. It would be a test of steel and spirit. Deep inside Japan's heartland, a war was being fought not with guns, but with blueprints. The engineers of the Imperial Army knew their Hago light tank was obsolete. Against America's Shermans and bazookas, it was like paper before fire. Yet still, they dreamed of steel that could stand against fate. The project began in secrecy. The Type 3 Chi-Nu and the experimental Chito were Japan's answer to the Sherman. Bigger guns, thicker armor, stronger engines. Machines born too late, children of desperation. But there was a problem that no blueprint could fix. Japan was running out of everything: steel, oil, even the air to breathe, choked by American firebombs and blockade. A tank can't fight without fuel. A nation can't fight without hope. Still, they built. Engineers melted down temple bells for copper, tore steel beams from bridges, and turned railway engines into armor plating. Every piece of metal, every drop of sweat, offered to the emperor, to the illusion that one more weapon could turn the tide. And across the ocean, the Americans prepared their own storm. The Sherman tank was no longer alone. New models rolled from Detroit in thousands. Easy 8, Jumbo, Crocodile, each a mountain of steel powered by industry's endless pulse. The war had become a duel between factories, one fueled by empire, the other by freedom. Japan's foundries whispered against America's thunder. Each hammer strike was defiance, each tank a prayer. But destiny was not in Tokyo's favor. The Cheeto, the most advanced tank Japan ever built, never reached the front lines. Only 2 were completed, and hidden near Lake Biwa, waiting for a battle that never came. By the time they were ready, Okinawa was burning, the empire was bleeding, and the age of tanks was ending beneath the wings of fire bombers. The steel had awakened, but it had awakened too late. The soldiers who once laughed at the Hago would now walk into the greatest inferno of them all. The next island would test not just metal, but the human soul. April 1945. The Pacific was a storm that never ended. 1,200 ships carried 500,000 men toward a small dot on the map, Okinawa. The island was green, quiet, almost beautiful from afar, but beneath its soil lay fortresses, tunnels, and the most determined army Japan had ever assembled. The battle for Okinawa was not just a fight for an island, it was a fight for the future. Whoever won Okinawa would stand at Japan's doorstep. The Marines knew it would be bloody. They did not know it would be hell. The first wave landed without a shot. The beaches were empty. The Hagos they found were already burned out, silent husks of old wars. But the real battle was waiting in the hills. General Ushijima had turned Okinawa into a labyrinth of death. Tunnels, caves, steel doors cut into rock. For every tank the Marines brought forward, a mine waited. For every flamethrower, a sniper in the dark. And for every advance, 1,000 souls ready to die. The Japanese rolled out their remaining armor, Type 95s, Chihas, even one Chinu brought from Kyushu. Their guns were weak, their fuel scarce. But each crew entered the tank as if entering a coffin. For the Marines, the old laughter was gone. They faced men who did not surrender. Okinawa was where valor became madness and duty became tragedy. The battle raged for 82 days. More than 250,000 souls were lost. Soldiers, civilians, children. Steel melted, bodies vanished, and the island became a graveyard with no walls. In June 1945, the guns fell silent. The Japanese commanders committed ritual suicide inside a cave lit by flickering candles. The Marines stood above them in silence, not with laughter, but tears. Okinawa was won, but at a cost so great that victory felt like defeat. The steel of the Hago, the Chinu, and the Sherman lay together in rusting ruin, equal in death, silent beneath the rain. August 1945. The land of the rising sun had fallen into shadow. The empire that once stretched across the Pacific now lay in ruins. Its cities burned to the ground, its people silent beneath the ashes of firebombs. The dream of conquest had become a nightmare of survival. The mighty war machine of Japan was gone. The Hagos, Chinas, and Cheetos lay rusting in fields or buried under rubble. The tank factories that once thundered with pride now whispered in silence. On August 6th, a new kind of fire fell from the sky, hotter than any flamethrower, brighter than the sun itself. Hiroshima vanished in an instant. Then Nagasaki. The war of steel ended in light. When the emperor finally spoke, his voice was calm, like wind through burned leaves. "We must endure the unendurable," he said. And with those words, Japan laid down its sword. The Allies arrived not as destroyers, but as rebuilders. American engineers and Japanese workers now stood side by side, dismantling tanks, melting guns, turning iron into plowshares. For the Marines who had survived Saipan, Okinawa, and Iwo Jima, Japan was no longer the enemy. It was a mirror, a reflection of what war truly costs. In the years that followed, Japan rose again, not with weapons, but with creation. The same precision that once built tanks now built cars. The same discipline that forged soldiers now forged engineers. The same spirit that died in war was reborn in peace. Ashes became iron again, but this time not for battle. For the first time in a generation, Japan's steel would serve life instead of death. The echo of war was fading, but the lessons of fire would never be forgotten. The war ended, but the ocean kept its secrets. Beneath the coral reefs of Saipan, Tarawa, and Okinawa, the ghosts of tanks still sleep, their steel slowly claimed by the sea. The laughter of the Marines, the cries of the defenders, all dissolved into the same salt water. For decades, divers and historians would find them, the remnants of a war that tried to consume the world. Each rivet, each bullet hole whispered a story of courage, of fear, of human hearts trapped inside metal. Across the ocean, in classrooms and museums, children would stare at the rusted tanks behind glass and ask, why did they fight? The answer was never easy, but in that question lies the future. The Pacific War forged two nations that once tried to destroy each other, and turned them into partners, allies, even friends. Out of the ashes came peace. Out of laughter and fire came understanding. The Hago tank, the tin can once mocked by Marines, now rests not as a symbol of weakness, but as a monument to humanity, to remind us how far we fell and how high we rose again. War ends, but memory never dies. The ocean still carries their echoes, the laughter, the screams, and the silence between.